Alright, so before we get into any actual rigging, we have to go through and understand some of the concepts of rigging, and then we can get to the actual rigging part. Okay, so with rigging, what we're doing is we're trying to figure out, okay, we have an object, in this case we have a sphere, and we have to, we have to figure out a good way to create controls for this so that whoever's animating this thing doesn't screw it up. Okay, that's essentially what it is. So for instance, let's say this is a sphere and it's meant only to rotate this way. Okay, and I could even, instead of using a sphere, might make it a little bit easier if you looked at this as a different kind of shape. Okay, if I were to grab every other one of these things here, and I extruded it. Okay, so now this is more like a gear sprockety type thing. Okay, so imagining that this is part of some big machine, this really should only rotate one way, which is that way. There would be no reason for this to rotate this way, and no reason for it to rotate that way. Okay, unless maybe it's like falling off the machine, in which case that's not typically an animation we would be doing like that. So one of the things we can do with rigging is we can create secondary controls, we can lock things, we can hide things, we can do lots of items here to make it very obvious that we don't want the person to be touching this thing. Okay, so I recommend, if you need to follow along, definitely take lots of notes while you're watching this video. You don't need to create these kind of pieces. This is just kind of like an example of what this could be used for. Alright, so looking at this piece here, let's say I duplicated this and I had another one like that. Okay, so now with this one here and this one here, you can see that again I only want to rotate it the one direction. Okay, and same thing with this one, I only want to rotate this one in the opposite direction. I never want these things to move. Like where they're at right now is exactly where I want them to be. But what happens if someone accidentally just nudges it? Now it's kind of screwed up. Okay. Also, as we look at the attributes over here, having these things at some funky values can really not really screw us up in what we're doing here, but in other cases it could. So what I'm going to do is I always like to get them in position and then I freeze transform them. And what freeze transform is going to do is it's going to reset the translate, rotate, and scale back to their default values, but keep them in the exact same spot. So when I hit freeze, you'll see that these go back to 0, 0, and 1s. Okay, and you'll see how they are back to where they were. So I'm also going to delete the history. There we go. Alright, so now if someone did accidentally move it, I can say, oops, just reset that back to 0, and it goes right back to where it should be. Alright, so that's part one. The next part is, let's say, rotation here. Alright, now if I want them to actually grab the geometry and rotate the geometry, that's one way that I could have this thing rigged. Alright, so that's what I'm going to do in this case. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to have them grab the geometry of this master one and rotate this one just in the X direction. So there's no reason for them to rotate it in the Y or Z, or scale it, or change the visibility. So I can highlight these here, right click, and I can do a lock selected. Okay, so now these are locked. I can also grab the translates, right click, and lock those selected. Alright, I could even grab them, right click, and say hide selected. Marquee, right click, hide selected. So now someone who's grabbing this, if they look, all they have is rotate. Okay, and if they grab it, that's all they can do. They can't grab the blue and rotate it. They can't grab the green and rotate it. They can grab the red, and that's all. Okay, they can't even go to the move tool. You see how it's grayed out. They can't go to the move tool and move it. They can't scale it. Alright, so the same thing for this one. I'm going to grab all these, control drag those, right click, and you'll see there's actually a lock and hide selected. So now that lock and hide selected is gone, so now we're good. Okay, so now what we can do is just set this thing up so that as I rotate the one, the other one's going to rotate as well. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm just going to set a keyframe. So I'm just going to go, let's say to 200. I'm going to right click and set a key. I'm going to go up to, let's say 100, and I'll rotate it, let's say like that. Let's just say 360. We'll make it nice and round and key that. Okay. So now we have 360-degree rotation on this thing. There it is. Okay. So now I need this guy to do the exact same thing. Now I could go in here and set a key, go up to 100, set this to negative 360 because it's going in the opposite direction. And now as I hit play, you'll see that these two things are kind of intertwined in how they're moving. And for the most part, it looks pretty realistic. There's a little bit of intersection here, but unless you're right up on top of this thing, you're not even going to see it. Okay. So we also have to keep that in mind, is that there's some things that, you know, we can set up that we can kind of fudge around to get it to look the way we need to. Okay, especially if these things are going like quicker, then we're not really going to see it at all. And then we had motion blur and the whole lot, and you'll see there's some areas that, you know, you literally can just kind of make it good enough. All right. So now that's fine, the way we set this up, setting keyframes on this one, setting negative keyframes on this one, just so we look at the graph editor so you can see it. Here's the two graphs. Okay, one goes one way, one goes the opposite way because it's spinning in the opposite direction. But now let's say we had to change one of these. Let's say I took this one, my master one here, and I really wanted it to just go really, really quick and then slowly step down. Okay, so now as I play this animation, you can see it's going to go quick, and then it's going to start to really slow down at the end. It goes quick and then really slows down at the end. So now in order to get this guy to do the same thing, I have to go and grab his graph and then try to match that up as best I can. Okay, and most likely I'm not going to be able to get it anywhere near what I need to without a lot of fudging and moving and tweaking. Okay, so this is a great instance where rigging really comes in handy because we can create a relationship. Basically, whatever this one is, that one's going to be negative. Okay, so I'm just going to take this guy and right click and delete that keyframe and reset it back to 0. And then I'm going to rewind. So now they're both back to 0. Okay, so I'm going to use what's called the expression editor. So I'm going to click here, go to edit, and say expression. Okay, so I clicked on this guy, clicked on the rotate, edit expression. And with the expression editor, what I can do is basically type things out. I can say part 1's, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Oops, home. It's thinking. There we go. Part 1's dot rotate x will equal part 2's dot rotate x. Okay, so there's always two parts to these kinds of things. We have the object. What object is it? Where do we get this from? This is their name. So in this case, we have this name right here. So let's give these things actual names. So this guy will be the master gear, and this guy will be the gear 2. Okay. And I always name things like this. So I would say first word. Okay. So see how I have lowercase everything in here except for the second letter, or the first letter of the second word. Okay. Now if I had something else like this is it, I capitalize every other word besides the first word. Okay, and this is called camel casing, where we just don't capitalize the first word, we capitalize the second word, capitalize the third, fourth, fifth, and so on. Okay, it makes it easier for us to read. You could do underscores for everything, but you'll see how this gets like just kind of doesn't need to be there. Okay, so part 1, master parts, master gear, this is my name. Okay, so everything that I name, I do this kind of naming. And it is easier to read once you kind of get used to doing that. If I did this, yes, it's still easy to read, but the computer doesn't like it as much. Okay, and the other way looks cooler, so that's a benefit. So there's the first part, which is this, part 1. And the second part is we have the attribute, okay? And we separate it with a dot. So this little dot that's right here, that's separating the name from the attribute. So we're saying from part 1, I want to control the rotate X, okay? Now this has to be spelled a certain way. So you'll see here, look at what it did. Lowercase first word, uppercase X. Okay, if we did translate Y, scale Z, you'll see it has the same camel casing that we talked about earlier. Okay, and that's why it makes much more sense to do that. Now if I go under edit in the channel box and go to channels, they're typically on nice. Okay, and nice means it says rotate X, capital R all the way down, there's a space and there's an X. Well, in expressions there's no spaces. Okay, we can have a space here and a space here, and I could have 450 spaces between this and the semicolon, but there's no spaces in names. Okay, it doesn't like it, so it displays it in a nice way. Oops. So I'm going to go to edit channel names and go to long, and then this is the long channel name, rotate X. That's what I would type in here if I wanted to control that attribute. If I go to edit channel names short, this is RX, okay? So I can also type in RX, and that's also the same thing, okay? So scale X, translate Z, whatever, okay? Same format, same syntax. So I like to have these on long, that way I can see exactly what the name is, okay? So that's what it's going to be. We have part 1 object.attribute equals part 2 object.attribute. All right, so we have to know what these things are named, so I typically have the outliner up when I'm writing an expression. Okay, and we know it's both rotate X's, so what I would do is I would say master gear, there's our camel casing, dot rotate X, okay, equals gear 2's dot rotate X. Now I'm spelling these out for you. I typically just use the short case. So what this would do is whatever master gear or whatever gear 2's rotation is, it would set it to master gear's rotation. Okay. So if master gear rotation was, let's say 5, then it would if we set it to 5 like this, it would constantly have this thing set to 5. Well, we're not setting master gears, we're setting the other one. We're setting gear 2's rotate X. Okay? And if I set this to 5, then it would constantly be 5. I don't want it to constantly be 5, or 2, or 1, or 6. I want it to equal master gear rotate X. Okay? So let's say I copy this. I go back into Maya, I go into my expression editor, and I just paste it down here. Now if I hit create, if I see red in this area, that means I've done something wrong. Like for instance, I'll put a 3 in the middle of this and hit edit, and I see red. And that means that I've typed something wrong. Okay, so then I go through and I say, oops, I've typed a 3, hit edit, now I'm good. Okay, we'll get back into this in a second. Okay, because I didn't finish the expression, it still needs some work. So right now, as I hit play, it's going to rotate both of these in the exact same direction with the exact same timing. Okay, so you see how they both are quick at the beginning and then they slow down at the end. So if I go into my expression editor again, I can also get it from window animation editor, expression editor. My expression is gone. Okay, so if I go to select filter by expression name, there's my expression, and here it is. So what I'm going to do is multiply this times -1. So multiplying anything times -1 just makes it opposite. So if this is positive, if this is positive, it'll make that negative. If this is negative, it'll make this positive. Edit. close. So now when I rewind and I hit play, you'll see that these two are lined up perfectly the way we need them to be. And if I needed to, I can go back to my master gear, go back to the graph editor, and I'll just kind of tweak this again. Let's do something really funky like that, okay? And you'll see that the animation goes for each one. And I don't have to go through and tweak that one, and tweak that one, and tweak that one. Now, as far as connections go, I really prefer to use the expression editor for lots of things, okay? And you'll see why in a second, okay? 1 second later. Let's take this and duplicate it. And if I duplicate this, you'll see that my stuff is still locked, okay? So if I go under Edit, see that I can't really get back my other ones, or I go to Channels, I can't really show the ones that are there, okay? So I'm going to go up to Window, General Editor's Channel Controls, and I'm going to turn back on my thing. So I'm going to go to Keyable, go to my Translates, and move them into the keyable area. Go to Locked, go to Translates, and move them into the non-locked area. Okay, so this is how you can get those back after you've moved them. So now let's say I take this and duplicate it and scoot it over here, and I'm just lining up the ends of this and duplicate it, set it right here, and make sure it's on the bottom. Let's see, this one's going to spin that way, this one's going to spin the other way, so this one has to be on this side, and this one's going to spin that way. Okay, let's try that. Okay, so again, these guys need to be frozen, so modify freeze, and you'll see that it's not going to let me do it because my other items are locked. All right, so rotate I can just reset to 0, that's no big deal. But my translates, I need to go into the freeze transform and just turn off these other two. There we go. That's the only one we changed anyway. Okay, now before I lock these again, I just want to make sure my placement's right. Let's go to my expression editor. So this is gear 3 and this is gear 4. And what I can do is I can copy this line. I'll do it in here so you can see it. This is times -1. I can copy this line, paste, and paste, and then just change this to 3, this to 4. Okay? Now every line is going to be opposite. So 2 is going to go negative, 3 is going to go positive, so I don't need them times negative, 4 will go negative. Okay? Now to separate each one of these lines, I have to have a semicolon at the end of it. Okay, so let me copy this, paste it into my expression editor, hit edit, and there we go. So now if I rewind it and I hit play, you can see that they're all moving in sync. Okay. Now some of these aren't really going to make too much sense because as we go, let's see, forward in this case, look up here as we go forward, there's no reason that this guy would be pushing the other one. Okay, so this is just because my model is not very tight. If I had those gears a little bit tighter, then as this one moves one way, it would be perfect, and moves the other way, it'd be perfect. So I could take this and kind of push it in more like that. And then freeze my transforms. And now it's a bit closer to looking like it should look, okay? But I could do this 158,000 times, and all I would have to do is add a separate line for each one. And you could actually get into heavier expressions that don't rely on using this kind of thing. Basically, I could create an expression, which is basically a mini program that says if the number here is an even number, then make it negative. If it's an odd number, then make it positive. Okay, so I can do that kind of stuff as well if I had an entire structure set up here. Okay, so now let's say we had another gear. I'm just going to duplicate this guy and pull him back. I'm just going to do a little bit more modeling on him. There we go. And I'll delete the history. I'll freeze its transforms. Perfect. Okay. So now we have this other gear that's way back here. And this gear that's way back here, I want him to rotate the exact same fashion as this guy. Okay. So I'm going to use a different kind of trick to do that. So under Window General Editors, there's this thing called the Connection Editor. On the left side is the output. Okay. So basically I want to get whatever rotation value this is and put it for the rotation value of this. So I click on this and I load it here. Click on this, load it there. And you can see the from to. I'm getting the attribute from this one and sending it to this one. Okay. And I'm just going to scroll down to rotate. Click on the word rotate. Scroll down to rotate here. Click on rotate there. And now it's done. So whatever this rotation is, that rotation will be equal to it. So there's no accept or anything, it just automatically connects it. So now as I rotate this one, oops, let me just do my timeline, you'll see that the rotation matches perfectly. So there's no expression there, it's just connected to it. Okay, and as I click on this, you'll see that this is a yellow color, and this is a purple color. That's indicating the different connection that we have there, okay? You'll also notice that if I go and set a key, that this turns salmon colored, and that's a different color that will be used for indicating that. All right. All right. So now those things are locked, and then I could create several other gears. Let's take this one and pull it back here, and do my own little rigging back here for all this other stuff. Okay. Now let's pretend. Let's get rid of all this. I hate deleting stuff, so I'm just going to hide it on a layer, because chances are I might need it again. Alright, so now let's take this cube. And this was a question I had about a week ago. Let's say that I have this cube here, and freeze the transforms, good. And what I want to do is, I'm going to create a locator, this guy. And every time the locator gets right underneath this cube, I want the cube to lift up. And when it gets away from the cube, I want it to fall back down. Okay? So that's what I'm going to set up here. So I'm going to move this locator back like this. I'm not going to freeze the transforms. This is going to be my controller. And this is going to be, I'm just going to call it box. And I'll put box 1, because I know when I duplicate it, it's going to create extra ones. Alright, so now I'm going to use a different window, and this window is going to be called set driven. So set driven animate, set driven key set. And this is going to be probably the hardest thing for you to grasp. So if you need to do this 15,384 times, then do it 15,385 times just to make sure you got it. Alright, so what I'm going to do is over here, this is kind of like the connection editor. Let me pop that back up. Okay, this is what is going to control this stuff. So basically, this is my controlling object, and this is my controlled object. Control-er, controlled, control-er, controlled. Same thing up here. This is my controlling object, or my controller object. And this is my controlled object. Okay, so I'm going to grab my controller, which is this locator, and load that as my driver. I'm going to click the box and load that as my driven. Okay, this is the car, this is the passenger. If the car moves, the passengers are going to move, right? Makes sense. So I'm going to set up a connection between them. Okay, and this is more of a custom connection. The connection editor does a 1-to-1. So when the rotation of one was at 50, the other one's going to be 50. When the rotation of the other one was at 185, the other one's going to be 185. So this one is going to be able to set up a completely separate one that's going to allow us to basically tell it, you know, when this one's at 1, this one could be at 7. And then when this one's at 12, then this one could be at 38. Okay? We can set it up in a point-by-point account of where we want things to be at certain points. Okay, so in this case, when this is back here, I want the block on the ground. When it's here, I want the block in the air. When it's here, I want the block back on the ground. Okay, and you'll see what kind of cool effect this is. All right, so we have to have the same thing, a controlling attribute. So which attribute is going to control it? Well, this rotate Z is going to control it. Okay, so translate Z, not rotate, translate Z is going to control this. And what is it going to control? The translate Y. The Y movement of this thing going up. Okay, so controller, translate Z, box 1, translate Y, set a keyframe. Okay, so this is not a time keyframe. This is a set-driven keyframe. So I've set it on translate Z, translate Y. I'm going to take this and move it back to 0. I'm going to take the box and move it up to, let's say, 2, and set a key. Then I'm going to take this, move it to positive 2, take the box, reset it to 0, set a key. Okay? So now as I take this locator and I move it back, you'll see, whoop, there goes the box. Okay? Now I could do this with an expression. I couldn't do it with the connection editor without doing some other stuff first. Okay? But I could even say, okay, well, now that it's done this, let's say that when I go here to -4, this box is going to go downward to -2. And then when I go back to -6, it's going to go back to 0. So I'm basically setting timeline or keyframes, but instead of using the timeline down here, I'm using this locator to tell it where to be. So it's going to go down, it's going to go up, and it's going to go back. Okay. Now, big deal. Why would you want to do something like this? Just keyframe this box moving up and down. Okay. Well, let's take this and let me just reset this stuff back to -2 here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab both the locator and the box. I'm going to say edit, duplicate special, duplicate input graph, and duplicate. And I'm just going to go to my outliner. Yep, I still have another box. I have another controller. I'm just going to scoot these over like that. There we go. And I'm going to go to edit, duplicate special again, scoot it over. Edit, duplicate special again, scoot it over. Edit, duplicate special again, scoot it over. Now I can just hit G and scoot it over. Okay, so now what I have here are all of these are connected. So just for fun, I'll just pull these back like this. Now I'm just pulling them back kind of randomly. I'm moving on past that little breaking point. Oops. Okay, I'm going to grab them all. I'm going to move them all forward. And you can see the little animation that we can create here very, very quickly. Okay, and I could even do something like this. Let me go to my top view to make it easier to see. Now I'm literally going to set these in just like a stacked area back here. There we go. So now, guess what's going to happen when I have these things go through? Okay. Now you try to animate that with the same amount of speed that I could do something like this. Okay. So something like this, huge benefit, enormous benefit to be able to do something like that. All right. Now we can get even further and further into this and create some really, really awesome effects using set driven and using a lot of these things. Okay, but I don't want to get too much into it now. I just want to give an introduction to it because you will be using set driven extremely a whole lot in the lectures that we're doing. Okay. Okay. So again, I'm just going to take this and set it on a new layer over there. All right. So that's a couple of these set driven that you're going to use a whole lot. There's the connection editor you're going to use a lot. There's expressions, which you're going to use a lot. And then there's also going to be some nodes that we'll be using as well. And this is where, you know, you have to get kind of creative with what you're doing. But inside these utilities in the hypergraph, hypershade, there's a lot of things like condition. Okay, this might look like nonsense here, but it is a way to kind of control things. There's also this one here, multiply, divide, where instead of us doing stuff in the expression editor to do the math, we could do it right here. And some people are more visual, where they like to see this kind of stuff and connect these things and make it work that way. I typically don't. There's an average where we can average things out. There's a whole bunch of stuff inside here that we could play with. Set range. Okay, and a lot of these you'll kind of, as you do more rigging things, you'll kind of find where these things really are useful in those respects. Let me save this just as rigging intro. I'm going to open up a scene. Find my documents. This is the Andy rig, and this is a character who is fully rigged, fully functioning. Every single control that you could possibly want on Andy is there. Okay, right now he's dark. So I'll just hit 5 so we can see it. And these are all different controls that they have on the Andy rig that make it easier for you to move him around. Okay. And if we grab this little control here and I grab the index controls and I middle drag out here, you can see how we can control those fingers moving. And the same thing here, control these fingers moving. And as I did this and grabbed this and moved it, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's happening there. So let's go into his expression editor, and you'll see here's all these expressions that Andy has on here that are making Andy do what he needs to do. Okay. Now in this case they've separated them into individual expressions. Like I said, I like to put all mine in one. Here is one big long expression. Okay. So for a rig like this, you really get a lot of different controls and different things that are happening to this. And if I went to the hypershade and I went to utilities, here is a conditional utility here that is controlling some of the Andy stuff that's going on. Here's some more conditional stuff. Here's a multiply divide. Here is the plus minus average. Here's a set range. There's a clamp. There's another average. Okay, so there's lots of different things that as you kind of explore rigging, you'll get to know what some of these things are. And there's a lot of resources out there for rigging. And I want you to understand this is more of an introduction to some of the rigging tools and how to rig things and how to make it much more easily to animate something. Okay, especially something like this, where you may love it like this. You may say, perfect, I love the way that looks. Then your boss says, you know what, I really don't like that. Can we get it to go a little bit higher? Then you're like, for real? I have to make it go a little bit higher? I have to go through and redo all this animation that I already set up? Well, all we have to do is go to the graph editor. You take that keyframe and set it to 4. And he doesn't like that it dips low, so we'll just get rid of the dip. So now we've changed it, so now it's just going to go like that. Okay. Now we can set things up to go further and further and further into detail. You can use stuff like measure tools. And if you've never seen the measure tool, let me just click there and there. And what the measure tool does is it actually goes through and it'll measure the distance between objects. Okay. So what I could do is I could have this thing, let's say just zeroed. There we go. What's the distance between this guy and this guy is 3. Okay, and then as I grab this one and move it, you'll see that that distance changes. So what I could do is instead of relying on the X rotation or the X translation here, I could have this set up to be controlled by that. So as this distance between the locator and this guy get less, then it goes up, and then as it gets further, it goes away. Okay, so I could do something like that and use that as a controlling object. That way I can also have it go, this way too. And I can create a whole field of this. I have done this before. Create an entire field of all these things going crazy. And it looks pretty awesome. I wonder if I could just do that real quick a different way. I'm going to take these and do a duplicate special. I don't know if this is going to work. We'll find out. There's a lot of trial and error when you're doing some rigging things. So let me grab my locators. All right, there we go. So that is going to work, it looks like. So now let me go to the top view and just kind of stagger these a little bit more. And that's good. Okay. So now I have all these kind of staggered. So now as this goes through, look at this really cool kind of bouncing. Sound effects not included. All right, cool. So hide that. All right, so that's part of the introduction to rigging using some of these keying tools. All right, now there's another tool that's going to be really helpful, which is this joint tool. All right, so let's say we had some blocks here. Five. Freeze the transforms, duplicate it. There we go. And you duplicate. There we go. Okay. So let's say I have these blocks here and I want to be able to control the blocks. So basically I want to be able to grab this one and move this entire structure around. Okay. What I can do is, let me go to my top view. I'm going to go to the skeleton tool and use the joint tool. And all the joint tool is this little chain. Okay, and it's just a bunch of I'm going to call them nonsense objects. They're just kind of parented to each other. Okay, hit enter. So as I do grab this top one, you'll see that the bottom ones all get selected. As I grab the next one, all those get selected. As I grab the next one, and so on. Okay. So I'm going to use this joint tool. And let me just line these guys up a little bit better. I'm just going to snap these right to, maybe not right to the grid. I'm going to do every other grid. No, I'll just do that. Whatever. So indecisive. All right, so I'm snapping these right to the grid. I'm just going to scale them down. That'll be my workaround just to get a little bit more room between them. There we go. Okay, so now there's a little bit more room between them. I'm going to, again, freeze the transforms. I just like that to be nice and clean. Delete the history. And then I'm going to use my joint tool. And I'm just going to hold down X and click a joint on each one of these grid units. X is my grid snapper. And I'll create an extra one out there. I always create an extra one past it, just for ease of use. All right, so now I want to move these up to the middle of this. Okay, so if I just move this first one, this very beginner one, which is called the root, up 0.5, it should get me right there, and it does. Okay, so now, even though I have this one selected, if I rotate it, you'll see that it rotates this whole chain. If I go to my outliner and I hit F, let me grab, I'm just going to grab all this junk from before and group it and just call that set driven. Take this and group that and just call that others. Alright, so if I click on this first joint right here, I go in the outliner, here's where that joint is, and if I hold down shift and click the plus sign next to it, it'll open it up. So you can see I do have joint 1 selected, and it's highlighting the rest of them, but these other joints are not selected. So if I click and drag in here, I grab all the joints. Okay, now you see that they're white except for the end one, and now when I go to rotate, you can see that it's rotating more of like this, kind of like a little tail would. And this goes back to that stick animation that we did where we were tweaking the individual components. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, is we're going to animate it via that, but what we're also going to do is take these blocks and parent them to this stuff. So I'm going to take this block, shift click this joint, and parent it. Grab this block, shift click that joint, it's going to highlight that, that's fine, and parent it. Grab this joint, shift click that, parent it. Grab this block, shift click that joint, parent it. This joint block, shift click that joint, and parent it. Almost done. Two more. Wonderful. Okay. So now that we have that, now we can go in here and grab the joints. Okay, and I just click and drag, grabs them all. Go to my rotate tool, rotate, and you'll see that now all those blocks are moving with it. Okay, so joints are great for being able to do this kind of thing because it makes it so much easier to grab the joints and do stuff with the joints, because I could just say show polygons, work with the joints, get the joints to do what I need them to do, and then turn the polygons back on and make sure that it's working the way it should. Okay, now this is one kind of example. If I go in here to my joint tool, and I'm just going to create a couple joints, just boom, boom, and whammo. You're expecting a boom, but I gave you a whammo. Alright, so now I have this, and if you look at it, it kind of looks like a shoulder, elbow, and wrist. So if I go to skeleton in here and I go to the IK handle tool, I can click that, and now I have this handle that I can use to kind of move this around. Okay, so let's pretend that I had a piece of geometry here. And typically the geometry comes first. I'm like skipping that step of putting the geometry in first, just to kind of demonstrate it. I'm just going to line this up. Kind of like that. Good. And extrude. Pull this down. A little bit of rotation. Extrude that. And then I'm just going to add some divisions to this. Mesh, add divisions. Good. And then I'm going to go to mesh smooth. Wonderful. And smooth it again just to be safe. Wonderful. Okay. So now we kind of have this like really rough looking arm. That's obviously not anything that you put in your demo reel. But now we can take these joints and we can get the joints to affect that arm. Okay, so I can click the joints, shift click the arm, and go to skin, bind skin, and there's 3 different ones here. Smooth is typically what you use for most things. It's much more intense, but sometimes you can get away with using a rigid. Okay, so for right now I'm just going to go to smooth and just leave it at smooth. So now if I grab this and move this around, you can see now I'm actually getting like deformation like if we had an actual arm here. Okay, and there's the elbow. Look at that, perfect elbow. All right, so now I can take this and I could use this as some other kind of control. Now this is the only way to do something like that. I can't, if I had this as a piece of geometry here, and I have to unlock this, once you skin something it becomes locked, so you can't move it. Scoot it over. I can't go through and just kind of grab vertices and rotate the vertices to get that kind of look, okay? Nor can I rotate this to get that kind of look. I'm actually deforming this object, so I need to use joints for this kind of operation, okay? And joints are typically what are used all over the place to get that kind of movement to happen on a piece of geometry like this, okay? Even if it's a hard object like these are just hard objects, then we could use joints to do that as well, and it just makes it a lot easier to do when we use joints. Okay, so this first guy here is the root joint. You can tell he's the root because none of these little bones between them are pointing at him. You'll see that he is the one that points away at all of them. Okay. This guy even has one pointing, this guy has one pointing, all the way up to this guy. And I also know it because if I click on him, he is selecting everything. Okay, so I can rotate him and move him around wherever I need to move him around to. Alright, same thing with this guy up here. If I just turn my geometry off, show polygons, you'll see that the shoulder is my main joint. So if I were to grab the shoulder joint and move it around, it's moving the entire thing. If I grab this bottom area and move it around, it's just moving that one around. Okay. Now we typically don't want to ever move joints around except for the root. Okay, so the root's kind of a special case where we can move that around. If we grab these and move them, you'll see that we're kind of breaking this relationship between them that we've already set up, and that's typically not something that would ever happen. So we typically would take the root, move the root because it still keeps everything connected together, but we wouldn't rotate the other ones. So if I needed to move these into a certain spot, I would just go through and just kind of grab some and rotate them until I got them in this spot that I needed them. Okay. Joints also have selection priority, so if I marquee this entire thing, it's selecting only that root joint. Okay, if I go to the outliner, you can see that it selects only that root joint out of the whole mess of stuff that we have there. If I marquee halfway here, whatever the top joint was that I selected is the one that gets highlighted. And then IK handles, the thing that I created in the end of this, that has selection priority over joints. So if I marquee everything in the scene, the only thing that gets selected is the IK handle. Okay? So if I want to select a joint, I have to literally get in there and kind of be very specific into what I'm clicking and making sure I click the exact joint. Okay? And you can see in this case, as I stretch that joint out, it actually does this really weird, stretchy thing. It's not really working out right because I'm grabbing the joint and not the IK handle. Oops. Okay? Now, as we're selecting joints, let me turn my polygons off again. This is the joint up here, but if you marquee the bone after it, it'll select the one above it. So I marquee this, it selects that one. I marquee this, it selects that one. So typically what I'll do is let's say we have something like that. If I needed this joint, I don't try to click on that joint. I just marquee, marquee, marquee. Okay? So if it takes you a couple minutes to get used to that, definitely play with it and get used to it. It'll just save you so much time. Because as we get into things, you may need a bunch of joints, and you really have to find out where that is the easiest way to grab that joint. Okay. Now we could also do, just like we talked about before, all of our set drivens and connection editor and whatever else stuff we could do right to these joints here to create some sort of rig that would allow us to manipulate these. Okay, so just for fun, because to me it's fun, I'm going to go to my expressions, oops, edit, expressions. And I'm going to say joint, it's my last joint, 12. Joint 12.rotatex. I'll do it in here so you can see it. X equals joint 1.rotatex. Okay, so now all I have to do is just go through and say 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. We're going to do 1, obviously. Okay, so we'll copy that. We will paste it. We will create it. Perfect. So now if I grab this joint, I rotate it in the X direction. You'll see how they're all kind of offset rotation. So I could also go through and say, let's go into, if this was an actual word processing program, I would have like a find replace, and I don't think I do. Replace, there it is. So I'm going to say Rx and replace it with RZ. Replace all. Okay, okay. Copy it. And I'm just going to paste that into my expression editor as well. Oops. Go to that expression. Go to the end. Paste it. And then I'll go through and do my replace. Find RZ and replace it with RY. There we go. So now all of the attributes are being controlled by this one. So as I rotate just that one now, because we've rigged it, all of them are going to work. You can see we can get some really neat animations with this. So just for fun, again, everything is fun in Maya. Let's set some keyframes. Play that out. Very cool. Now we're going to set some random keyframes in the middle just to give us a little bit more of an interesting look. Kind of a silly little thing, but it's pretty neat. And again, we've set three attributes keyframes. So if we need to tweak them, we're only tweaking these 3. We're controlling the entire thing. And sometimes I like to just, see what happens. You'll be surprised at how much stuff you can kind of learn just by being a kid and just playing with some of these settings. Just seeing, what's going to happen if I do this, this, or this. You can see it's not the coolest animation in the world, but it's definitely kind of a neat little thing. And again, we've only set a couple keyframes on this. Okay. Now I could even come in here, and instead of these things being exactly equal to it, let's say joint 12 is further down the list. I can say it's equal to whatever that is times 0.1. This one times 0.2. Oops, 0.2. This one times 0.3. This one times 0.45. This one times 0.5. This one times 0.9. Oops, 6. Let's go back to this one, say 8.5. 9. There we go. So just for fun, let's see what that happens. What that happens. Let's see what happens when we do that. Go back to the expression editor. Just going to delete what I have, paste the new one in. Go through and do my replacing. Again, I don't know how to use this program. Our Y will replace it with our Z. Replace all, okay, close, copy, paste that, and then go back here, replace RZ, RX, and there we go. Okay, so now let's take a look at this animation that we get. And you see it's a little bit looser. It's not as tight as it was. And the reason for that is because these values are not 100%. So as I rotate this one 30, let's say 50 degrees, 50 degrees, this end one here is only getting rotated 10 because it's only a tenth or a fifth of what the other one is. Okay, or whatever percentage I typed in there. 0.1. Yeah, the tenth. So as I play with this, you can see the kind of animations we can get where we can really tweak this and get some neat things just by kind of creating a relationship of how much each one would bend. And using these little math things in there, you get some really, really cool stuff. Okay, and that's using joints as well. So let me grab all this junk. Group it. Joints. Throw it on a layer and hide it. It's gone. Okay, I've discussed these before, but I'm just going to go over them again. We have these create deformers in here. I'm just going to show a couple of these because they work pretty much similar to each other. We have the squash. And this has a handle which is called a factor, and then I can squash this thing. Okay, it has a start smoothness. Let me squash it. And an end smoothness. So as I tweak these, you see I can adjust the results of this thing post what I've done. I can also control where this low bound is. You see where that thing is moving down, or I can move it up and kind of take it away. And then where this is coming from is also going to play a role in this as well. Okay, and then we also have bend. That's another one. Again, I'm just going to move this down to the bottom, change my curvature here. Okay, and these are all things that I could rig and animate and set up and do whatever to kind of help my animation do what I need it to do. There's twist, or to actually twist the geometry. In this case, it's not really doing anything, but I could, you know, if I had this thing kind of stretched out also, let's go here and say squash, like that. And then twist. There we go. I could also do a flare. Okay, and then let me delete all these. And I'll create a NURBS plane. And all of these are based on division. So the more divisions you have, the smoother it's going to look. And I'll put a wave on here. And again, these are just settings. Just play with the settings. You'll figure out these things faster than me trying to tell you what each thing is going to do. Okay, so now we have this like offset wave thing. Let's take the wavelength down to 0.1. Let's add a little drop off. And just playing with the offset of this, I have to set a keyframe, otherwise it's not going to do anything. Key it, go up to like 100. Set it again. So now you can see we're getting this like wave distribution here. Okay, not the world's most exciting thing, but still kind of neat. A lot of these are going to have this envelope, which is basically like an overall. How much do you want this overall effect to be happening on here? Turn it to 0, it's gone. Turn it to 1, it's there. Turn it to 2 or 5, it'll amplify it. I guess 2 is the highest it's going to go. Maybe 3? Nope, 2. All right. Put to 0.25, you get half the effect. Okay? So all those are going to have that. There's also a sine wave, which is pretty much like that one, except it's a sine wave. Oops, and again, keyframes help. Some of these, the movement is so subtle that you have to set keyframes in order to see it. Okay, and it's actually waving this way. I'm going to rotate this upward. There we go. So now we can see this thing moving the way it was intended. This is kind of like a sine wave from like math class. And not kind of, it actually is a sine wave from math class. Okay, so we can create some cool things like this. A lot of times you can actually use these to model with too. If you needed this kind of shape, there it is. You can duplicate it, and now you have that shape, and you can do whatever you want with it. Okay, so those are the nonlinear deformers. There's also a cluster, which we'll get into what a lot of these are. I can grab a section, create a cluster, and now I have this little C that allows me to animate that section. So if I wanted to, I can write an expression on this and say ty equals sine of time times 5. Ty equals sine of time times 5. Okay, just like we talked about the sine wave a second ago, same thing. So now if we watch this, now it's just a cycle. It's just moving along a sine curve, doing that animation. And I can set this to maybe 2. I think that's probably a little bit too much. Multiply my time times 10. This is what I'm doing here. This is changing the frequency, how often it happens. This is changing the amplitude, how much it moves. Okay. Now imagine having to keyframe that. You wouldn't want to. Especially with the flexibility that we have here, where we can just say, you know what, I need to go a little bit faster, a little bit slower. I need it to be kind of like a different curve. Let's say Ry equals cosine of time times 20. That's what the second one says. Rotate y equals the cosine of time times 5 times 20. Parentheses are important. You can see a little twisting and movement we're kind of getting off of this thing. Now let's make this happen a little bit quicker on that one. I want the effect to be a little bit more drastic. There we go. So you can see a little shimmying we're getting here. Very cool stuff. Alright, so that's that guy. There's also a soft mod tool. So again, I can grab some points, soft mod, and if I go to my outliner, you'll see that I actually have a soft mod handle, which is kind of like a cluster, except it's called a soft mod. It has an S, and as I drag it, you can see that we get a soft modification to this. Okay, we can do the same thing with cluster. Soft mod's kind of like a newer version of it, and we can control the fall off radius and create just a a different blend of how this thing is moving. Works the same way as the cluster. Okay. Sculpt deformer. Some of these. Just delete that. Let's go with polygon sphere. Create a sculpt deformer. And these are just, they're fun. They are fun. You just have to figure out how to use them. Outliner, sculptor. And as I scale this up and I move it, oops, there we go. As I move it to the edges, scaled it up too much. You'll see that it's kind of like poking through. It's kind of like, you know, when women are pregnant and they have a baby. That's how you could animate the baby kicking the stomach. Okay, and again, it could be keyframed or whatever. We could actually use it to kind of do like puff things out. So if we had like, you know, cheeks that we were animating, let me create another one. Okay, and we start to get this like collapsing just because our settings are not set up too much. We have to take the drop-off distance down some, or up some. Down some, that's what I thought. Okay, and again, this could be used as a modeling tool for like a bug-eyed character. Okay, very easy to kind of create that kind of stuff. Never used jiggle. I've used the wire tool. The wire tool is pretty cool. I'm going to click on this little magnet up here, the far right one. Click on create CB curve. And I can draw right on the surface with the curve. Wonderful. Click the magnet off. You'll see that that curve is now like a 3D curve matched up to that. So I go to the wire tool. And this little guy down here helps you. Okay. Select the shape to deform. Click it. Enter. Now select the wire. To zoom in to grab it, enter. So now this wire is deforming at that spot. So imagine this was like an eyebrow. We could have this thing kind of set up in a fashion to animate an eyebrow moving. I can right click and go to control vertex, grab these points here, create a soft mod handle. Okay, grab the points. Oops. Grab the points here. Create another soft mod handle. Where's my soft mod? Alright, the soft mods don't like to be on curves, so I'll just create a cluster. Clusters don't mind. There we go. Then I can grab that cluster, grab this cluster, grab this cluster, and I can animate this thing, you know, all day long doing this kind of stuff. Okay, so it's just a quick, you know, intro to these things. We'll get more into what each one of these things is, just for fun. There you go. This thing here, I always forget about it. Curve point, grab a point on the curve somewhere on here, usually it's at the end, create deformer point on curve, and then we get this little locator. You see how it's kind of locked to it. I can animate that one, I can animate that one. So some of these things come in handy because if we wanted to keep something permanently locked to the end of this curve, we could just by connecting it to that locator. Alright, and then lastly, we have these constraints up here. It's not lastly, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. We have these constraints. So I'm just going to duplicate this guy. And let's say I wanted this guy to move with that guy. Okay, I'll just reshape these things like that. Okay, so this guy, I want to move with him. So I always click what I want to move last. So I want this guy to be my regular object. this guy to move with that object. So I click him, shift click him, and I can do a point constraint. Let me reset my settings. Alright, so now what happens is I grab him and I move it, you'll see that that other block is going with it. Okay, now this does lock it, so I can't take this and move it, because as I move this one, it jumps back. Okay, so it's not like parenting. This is literally like locked to it. Alright, and there's specific reasons why you want something permanently locked to an object like that. And if I rotate it, you'll see that there's no rotation that happens. It's simply point movement. So let's break the connection here. Click this, click that, and if I did an orient constraint, now as I rotate the one, it's going to rotate the other. Okay, if I move it, nothing happens. But as I rotate, they rotate together. And I could do point and orient constraint on here, and now it'll move and rotate with that guy. Now this is actually an old version. I'm going to go to the outliner and delete this. These constraints kind of pile up in the history. This is an old version, point and orient. The new one is parent. Okay, it's not new, it's just newer. Okay, so I click this, click that. I can go to the parent constraint, and I can individually control translate or rotate. And all of these have the ability to isolate X, Y, or Z, so I could just have it happen in one direction and not the other directions. Okay, so parent constraint does both. Move, rotate, voila. Okay. Here's a fun one, is the aim one. So again, let's grab this, go to aim. I'm just going to set up a couple options here, telling it which is the aim vector, which is the one I want to be the aiming one, which is in this case the Y. And then my up vector, I just pick either X or Z, not Y. Add. So nothing really changed, but now as I move this, to make it a little bit more obvious. There we go. As I move this, you can see that now this thing is pointing constantly at this thing. Okay. We also have scale, which is obviously going to do just scale. We have geometry. Let's go and create another shape. Click that. Click that. Geometry. And what this one's going to do is it's going to connect it to the geometry. So it's stuck to this piece of geometry. It can't move off this piece of geometry. Okay, as I move it, you can see that it's just going to move along that. So if we had something like this where we needed this to constantly be moving, and you're not going to know right off the, right away, I'm going to need this for this assignment. But you will kind of say, you know what, I wish I had something that would do this, and this is where that's going to come in handy. Let's scale that up a little bit. Create another piece of geometry. I'll do a cone. Come on, move you out. And this time we'll do normal. And what normal is going to do, let's scoot him over. Oops. Is it's going to keep this surface normal to the other one. So as I move this, nothing's really going to happen, but as I rotate it, it's going to try to stay on there. Now you're not getting a good idea of what's happening here. I thought that'd be better. Let's say I had a sphere and I had that cone. Well, let's just delete that. So I'm going to take this and do a geometry constraint. So now it's stuck to it. Okay, so as I move the sphere, remember what happened to the other one. So I'm also going to do a normal constraint. Okay, and I can go in the attribute editor afterwards and edit this normal constraint, and I'm just going to change my aim vector to the Y direction here. So now what's happening is this cone is set up to ride perfectly along it and point outward. Okay, so then as I take this and I say, okay, I want this to move down here, or I want it to move over here, not only is it stuck to the geometry, but it's also pointing away from it. So this can be especially helpful for modeling some things, as well as, many other things. Don't really use tangent. Point on poly is kind of a neat one. Just click on that. Point on poly. Oops. I'm going to create something. I'm going to create a locator. So grab a vertice. Shift click the locator. Point on poly. And now that locator is just stuck to that polygon. So if I were to come in and move it around, it's going to move with it. If I did any deformers on it, like a squash, you'll see that that stays perfectly locked to it. So I could parent some other object to that. Let's say this object. Just shift click that locator and hit P to parent it. And then as I do this, you'll see that it's permanently stuck there forever. Okay. Never use closest point. Pull vector we'll get into. And that's the constraints. Okay. Now a lot of these can be used for blending, which we'll get into also. But obviously this is a lot to even digest right now. So I do recommend making sure you took a lot of notes, watching the video again if you need to, taking more notes, playing with some of these things. Again, it's not rocket science. It's basically a video game that you're playing with. Okay. It's a matter of just going through and just trying to understand what these tools are doing, just like you kind of figure out what your phone is doing or what the controls are for whatever video game you're playing. Okay? But the more comfortable you are with understanding, especially like the set driven, doing the hypershade, doing expressions, using the skeletons, using these deformers, the better off your tool set's going to be for when you have a task you need to create. Okay? So this is the intro to it. Once you're done with this and you're satisfied that you're ready to move on, then move on to the next part of this, which is actually rigging an object.